On
I am
her
divorcing
birthday,
my wife,
Millionaire
and this
husband brought
child, this
Mistress's
beautiful
baby
child,
and asked
is
for
mine.
divorce. Her reply made everyone laugh and crushed him instantly. "Hi, my beautiful family. I am your brother, Mr. Peter. May the Almighty pour rivers of peace into your heart, healing every pain you've carried, lifting every weight you've borne, and turning every tear you've shed into a crown of strength. May His light protect you like armor and guide your path like the dawn after a long night. Amen. If you are here, type present. If you stand with me, type I am with Mr. Peter. My family, I bleed my soul into every story for you. But when you leave early, it's like turning away before the truth is revealed. It wounds me, it dishonors our bond, and it whispers to the world that my hard work means nothing. Please, watch till the very end, not for views, but to keep the heart of our family alive. Like, comment, and subscribe, because each moment you stay is a promise that we rise together." The champagne glass shattered against marble, its fragments catching light like fallen stars, but nobody moved to clean them because everyone in the Errol mansion was too busy watching a marriage die. Roselle Fragrance stood in the center of her own birthday party, 26 candles still burning on an untouched cake, wearing the crimson dress Simon had bought her last anniversary, back when his lies still came wrapped in Tiffany blue. Her beauty was undeniable even in this moment of betrayal. Skin like burnished mahogany that seemed to glow from within, natural hair styled in an elegant crown of coils that framed features so striking that photographers often asked if she modeled. Her eyes, dark as midnight but holding galaxies of intelligence, remained perfectly calm as her husband walked through their mahogany doors holding a baby that wasn't hers. The infant, swaddled in pink cashmere that cost more than most people's rent, gurgled innocently in Simon Errol's arms. Behind him, Isla Colette entered like a victor returning from war, her platinum blonde hair cascading over a designer dress that Roselle recognized. It was from her own closet. "Happy birthday, darling," Simon said, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that comes from believing you've already won. At 32, he still possessed the kind of angular good looks that graced magazine covers featuring young pharmaceutical executives, his grey eyes cold as surgical steel. "I thought it was time we stopped pretending." The room held 63 guests. Roselle had counted them earlier, a habit from her psychology training, always cataloguing, always observing. Her parents sat frozen at the head table, her mother's hand suspended halfway to her pearls. Simon's family occupied the opposite side, his mother Charlotte already reaching for her phone, probably to call their lawyer. Business associates, country club friends, and society photographers who'd been hired to capture a celebration were now witnesses to a massacre. Simon pulled papers from his jacket with theatrical precision. "Divorce papers, already signed by me. Isla and I are in love. And this," he lifted the baby higher, "is our daughter, 3 months old. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you, and what better time than surrounded by everyone who matters." The silence that followed could have suffocated stars. Then, unbelievably, Simon's brother James started clapping, slowly, deliberately. Others joined, his mother, 2 of his business partners, even the lawyer who'd helped structure their prenup. The sound built like thunder before a storm. Roselle's smile started small, just a subtle curve at the corner of her full lips, but it grew into something that made the room's temperature drop 10 degrees. She reached for her champagne, a fresh glass, handed to her by a server who seemed to materialize from nowhere, and took a deliberate sip. "Fascinating," she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. Her PhD in psychology had taught her that the most powerful moments weren't loud, they were quiet, controlled, inevitable. "Simon, darling, you always did have a flair for the dramatic, but you forgot something crucial about theatre." She set down her glass and walked toward him, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. The crowd parted, and she noticed Penelope Ashford, her best friend since childhood, filming everything on her phone. Good. Evidence was always useful. The best plot twists, Roselle continued, now close enough to smell his cologne. Tom Ford, she'd bought it for him last Christmas, are the ones nobody sees coming. From her clutch, she withdrew a manila envelope, its contents heavy with promise. Before you continue your little performance, perhaps you'd like to explain these medical records to our audience. Official documentation from Hudson Fertility Clinic dated 18 months ago. You remember, don't you? When you insisted we try for a baby. Simon's face shifted, the smugness cracking like cheap paint. The tests were quite comprehensive, Roselle said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Azoospermia. Complete absence of sperm in your semen. The doctors were quite thorough. 3 separate tests over 6 weeks. You've been sterile since that polo accident in college, haven't you? The one you told me was just a minor fall. Gasps rippled through the room like dominoes falling. Isla's face drained of color, her carefully contoured makeup suddenly stark against pale skin. Which means, Roselle turned to face Isla directly, that beautiful baby girl isn't his. So the question becomes, whose is she? Charlotte Errol's phone clattered to the floor. James stopped clapping, his hands frozen mid-motion. The photographers, sensing blood in the water, raised their cameras. But wait, Roselle said, returning to her table where her grandmother's leather journal sat beside the birthday cake. There's more. You see, I've known about your affairs for 2 years, Simon. 17 of them, to be precise. Would you like me to name them? Because I have receipts, credit card statements, hotel bookings, that weekend in Miami with your secretary Stella, the conference in Tokyo that mysteriously extended 3 days, the gym trainer, the wine merchant's daughter, the federal judge's wife. She opened the journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes in her elegant handwriting. I documented everything, times, dates, purchases, that necklace you bought for Mistress number 12, charged to our joint account, the abortion you paid for with Mistress number 8, also our joint account, all violations of our prenuptial agreement's fidelity clause. Simon's hands shook, the baby beginning to cry as if sensing the tension. You thought you married a beautiful fool, Roselle said, her voice gaining strength. Someone you could parade at pharmaceutical conferences to charm black doctors and open doors to communities your company wanted to exploit. But you never bothered to really know me, did you? Never asked about my grandmother, Adeline Fragrance, who built a cosmetics empire from nothing and taught me that roses might be beautiful, but they evolved thorns for a reason. She picked up the divorce papers he'd dropped, scanning them with professional interest. Your lawyer did adequate work, but they missed something crucial. The fidelity clause runs both ways, and the penalty for violation is forfeiture of all marital assets. All of them, Simon. The room erupted. Charlotte Errol lunged for the papers, but Roselle stepped back, graceful as a dancer. Simon's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, no sound emerging. As for your announcement, Roselle addressed the room, I thank you all for coming to witness this. The photographers especially. I'm sure these photos will be worth a fortune to the right publications. The headline writes itself, Pharmaceutical Heir's Birthday, Surprise Backfires Spectacularly. She walked to the cake, still pristine with its 26 candles burning, and blew them out in one breath. My wish already came true. You showed everyone exactly who you are, Simon, a man so stupid he didn't verify the paternity of a child before destroying his own life in front of 63 witnesses. Isla finally found her voice, shrill with panic. You're lying. The baby is his. Tell them, Simon. But Simon couldn't speak because he was staring at his brother James, whose face had gone ashen. The resemblance, now that everyone was looking, was unmistakable. The baby had James's nose, his chin, the same unusual amber flecks in her blue eyes. I believe that's my cue to leave, Roselle said, gathering her journal and clutch. "Penelope, did you get everything?" "Every second," her friend confirmed, waving her phone. As Roselle walked toward the door, her mother stood, tears streaming down her face, tears of pride, not sorrow. "That's my daughter," she said loudly. "That's my brilliant, beautiful daughter." The applause that followed was different from before. Genuine, awed, respectful. Simon's carefully orchestrated humiliation had become his own execution, and Roselle hadn't even raised her voice. At the door, she turned back one final time. "Simon, happy birthday to me. And just so we're clear, this is only the beginning. You wanted a war? You just declared it on someone whose grandmother taught her that revenge, like wine, is best served after proper preparation. Oh, and check your email. Your pharmaceutical board will have some interesting questions about those contaminated vaccines you shipped to Nigeria last year." She left him standing there, holding another man's baby while his world began its descent into chaos, the birthday candle's smoke still curling toward a ceiling that suddenly felt too low, in a room that suddenly felt too small, surrounded by people who would never look at him the same way again. Chapter 2. The morning after dawn broke over Atlanta like spilled honey, but Simon Errol hadn't slept to see it arrive, spending the night instead drowning in whiskey and watching his life dissolve through the blue light of his phone screen. 27 missed calls from his mother, 43 from board members, 18 from lawyers, 1 from Isla, followed by a text, "The baby is yours, I swear. James means nothing." But the mathematics of conception didn't lie, and neither did the calendar he'd frantically checked 16 times. He'd been in Tokyo when this child was conceived, closing a deal that now felt like it happened in another lifetime. The Ritz-Carlton suite he'd escaped to after the party felt like a prison with Egyptian cotton sheets. His phone buzzed again, a Google alert for his name. The headlines were multiplying like cancer cells: pharmaceutical heir's birthday bombshell, sterile executive's public humiliation, Roselle Fragrance, the woman who destroyed a dynasty with documents. But the worst was from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. FDA launches investigation into Errol Pharmaceuticals following anonymous tip about Nigerian vaccine scandal. His phone rang. Charlotte Errol's name flashed on the screen, and against his better judgment, he answered. "You absolute fool." His mother's voice could have frozen hellfire. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your father is having chest pains. The board called an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock, and that little influencer of yours is camped outside our estate with photographers, claiming she's part of the family." "Mother, I can explain." "Explain? Explain how you didn't know you were sterile, how you brought another man's bastard to humiliate the only woman who ever gave you legitimacy in the black medical community. Do you understand that 40% of our revenue comes from contracts Roselle helped secure?" The line went dead. Simon threw his phone against the wall, watching it shatter like his marriage had 12 hours earlier. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse he'd never known existed, Roselle Fragrance sat at a marble dining table, reading the Wall Street Journal's early edition while sipping Ethiopian coffee from her grandmother's china. The apartment sprawled across the top floor of Buckhead's most exclusive building, purchased 6 months ago through a trust Simon knew nothing about. "The pharmaceutical board wants a statement," Penelope said, entering with her laptop and a box of pastries from the French bakery downstairs. Her forensic accounting firm had worked through the night, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her smile was victorious. "Also, 3 publishers have already called about book deals." "Tell them I'm considering my options," Roselle said, her voice smooth as the silk robe she wore, a gift to herself, purchased yesterday morning when she'd known what the evening would bring. "What about the other matter?" "The FDA investigation is moving faster than expected. Turns out they've been building a case for 2 years, but needed an insider to confirm what they suspected. Your documentation was like Christmas morning for them." Roselle smiled, remembering the hours she'd spent copying files, photographing documents, recording conversations. Simon thought her psychology degree was decorative, something to discuss at dinner parties. He never realized she'd minored in forensic psychology, specializing in corporate crime patterns. Her phone chimed. A text from Dr. Matteo Winters, her mentor. Saw the news. Your grandmother would be proud. The foundation board meets Thursday. We're ready to announce the Adeline Fragrance Medical Scholarship for young black women. Another chime. This time from Stella Blackwood, Simon's secretary. He doesn't know I've been feeding you information for 8 months. Should I go to work tomorrow as normal? Yes, Roselle typed back. Document everything. He'll spiral, and desperate men make mistakes. By noon, Simon had attempted his first apology. Not directly, he was too proud for that, but through his lawyer, Harrison Clark, who arrived at Roselle's building looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Errol. Ms. Fragrance, Roselle corrected, receiving him in her home office, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city Simon once promised her. I took my husband's name as a courtesy. That courtesy has expired. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his Italian leather chair. She'd chosen the furniture specifically to make visitors feel small. My client wishes to discuss an amicable resolution. Amicable? Roselle laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a storm. Your client attempted to humiliate me at my birthday party, with my family present, with photographers he hired to document what he thought would be my destruction. He admits his approach was ill-considered. Is that what we're calling it? She opened a folder on her desk, its contents meticulously organized. Let me explain something about amicable, Mr. Clark. Amicable would have been a private conversation. Amicable would have been mediation. Your client chose war. I'm simply better armed. She slid a document across the desk. This is a timeline of every asset transfer Simon made in the last 6 months, preparing to leave me with nothing, moving money to offshore accounts in the Caymans, transferring property deeds to holding companies. He even tried to hide his grandfather's art collection in a Swiss vault. Harrison's face paled as he read. How did you get this information? Your client's greatest weakness is his assumption that beautiful black women can't be both decorative and dangerous. He discussed every transaction in bed with Isla, never knowing she sleep-talks. The baby monitor in their love nest has been broadcasting to an app on my phone for 3 months. That's inadmissible. Wiretapping is perfectly legal when you own the property being monitored. Did Simon not mention, I bought that apartment 6 months ago through a shell company. I've been his landlord while he was playing house with his mistress. The lawyer's hands trembled as he set down the papers. What do you want? Everything he tried to steal returned with interest, full compliance with the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause, and his resignation from Errol Pharmaceuticals board within 72 hours. He'll never agree to that. The company is his inheritance. The company is built on blood, Roselle interrupted, her voice sharp as surgical steel. Those contaminated vaccines killed 83 children in Lagos. I have the internal memos proving Simon knew about the contamination and shipped them anyway to avoid quarterly losses, so he can resign, or he can explain to a federal jury why profit mattered more than African children's lives. Harrison stood to leave, then paused. You planned this, all of it. I learned something from my grandmother, Roselle said, moving to the window where the city stretched below like a conquered kingdom. She built her empire during Jim Crow, when black women weren't supposed to own businesses, much less multi-million-dollar corporations. She taught me that when someone underestimates you because of your skin, your gender, your beauty, that's not your weakness, it's your weapon. By evening, Simon had attempted another approach. He appeared at the Fragrance family home in Cascade Heights, where Roselle's parents lived in the house her grandmother had bought in 1962, when black families had to fight for the right to own property in good neighborhoods. Joseph Fragrance opened the door, his 6'4" frame filling the doorway like a wall. A retired Marine colonel, he'd never liked Simon but had held his tongue for his daughter's sake. That courtesy, like his daughter's, had expired. "Sir, I need to speak with Roselle. You need to leave." Joseph's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd commanded battalions. "Before I forget, I'm a Christian. I'm still her husband." "You're a mistake she's correcting." Roselle's mother, Diana, appeared beside her husband, elegant even in casual clothes. "And if you step foot on this property again, I'll personally ensure every black church in Atlanta knows exactly what you did to their beloved Adeline's granddaughter." Simon retreated, but not before catching a glimpse of Roselle through the window, sitting at her grandmother's piano, playing Chopin Nocturne as if she hadn't just orchestrated his destruction. That night, alone in his hotel suite, Simon made a discovery that chilled him deeper than anything else. He'd tried to access their joint accounts only to find them frozen pending investigation. His personal accounts, however, were still accessible, with exactly $1 remaining in each. A note in the transaction history, typed in Roselle's distinctive style: "I left you what you left me, nothing worth keeping." Chapter 3. The Legal Storm. The law offices of Ashford, Nicholson and Associates occupied 3 floors of Atlanta's most prestigious legal building, but today they felt like a war room where Roselle Fragrance was both general and ammunition. "He's hired Reginald Thornton," Penelope announced, entering the conference room where Roselle sat surrounded by bankers' boxes, each one containing another year of her marriage's financial autopsy. "The man who got that senator's son acquitted of insider trading." Roselle didn't look up from the document she was reading, Simon's secret correspondence with a Panamanian law firm about hiding assets. "Thornton's good, but he's also predictable. He'll try to paint me as a gold digger who married Simon for money, which would work better if I hadn't been worth more than him before we even met." The truth of that statement hung in the air like expensive perfume. 3 weeks after the birthday disaster, documents had surfaced proving Adeline Fragrance had left her granddaughter not just money, but patents for skincare formulas now worth over $800 million. Simon had married up without knowing it. "There's something else," Penelope said, her expression shifting from professional to concerned. "Hudson Vale wants a meeting. Today." Roselle finally looked up, her dark eyes sharp with interest. Hudson Vale, the mysterious investor who'd appeared at 3 pharmaceutical conferences Simon attended, always watching from the periphery, never approaching until now. "Send him in," she said, smoothing her cream-colored suit, chosen specifically because it made her look like an angel about to deliver damnation. Hudson Vale entered like a man who owned rooms before he bought them. 35 years old with the kind of devastating beauty that belonged on Renaissance sculptures. His dark skin gleamed under the office lights, and his suit probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was his eyes that caught attention. Intelligent, calculating, with secrets swimming in their depths. "Ms. Fragrance," he said, his voice carrying a British accent that hadn't been there when she'd researched him. "Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Vale." She gestured to a chair across from her, noting how he moved. Controlled, purposeful, dangerous. "I'm curious why a venture capitalist who specializes in biotechnology wants to meet with a soon-to-be divorced woman. Because that woman is about to own 51% of Errol Pharmaceuticals, and I'd like to discuss what she plans to do with it." Roselle's expression didn't change, but inside her mind raced. "That's presumptuous." "Is it?" Hudson pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. "Simon's father, William Errol, signed his shares over to his wife Charlotte 20 years ago for tax purposes. Charlotte, who despises scandal more than she loves her son, is willing to sell those shares to make this problem disappear. Combined with what you'll receive in the divorce, you'll have controlling interest. And you know this how?" Because I've been investigating Errol Pharmaceuticals for 3 years, Ms. Fragrance. Long before you discovered those contaminated vaccines, I knew about them, along with the suppressed cancer studies, the bribed FDA officials, and the 47 deaths they've covered up across 6 countries. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Roselle studied him with the intensity she'd once reserved for doctoral dissertations. You're not really a venture capitalist. I am, among other things. He leaned back, his presence filling the space between them. My sister was one of those 47 deaths. Keisha Vale, age 9, died from contaminated insulin that Errol Pharmaceuticals knew was defective, but shipped anyway, because recall costs would affect stock prices. Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. I want them destroyed, Hudson continued, but legally, completely, in a way that ensures no other child dies for their profit margins. You want your revenge for personal betrayal. I want justice for murder. Our goals align. And what are you proposing? A partnership. I have resources, connections, and information. You have impending ownership and the kind of public sympathy that makes juries weep. Together, we turn Errol Pharmaceuticals into something that actually helps people instead of killing them. Before Roselle could respond, her phone buzzed. Stella Blackwood was calling. "Excuse me," she said, answering. "Stella?" "He's here," Stella whispered, panic threading through her voice. "At the office, he's destroying everything, shredding documents, deleting files. Security won't stop him because his name's still on the building." Roselle stood, her movement fluid as water. "Call the FBI. Tell them someone is destroying evidence in an active federal investigation. Hudson, you're with me." They moved through Atlanta's financial district like elegant predators, Roselle's heels clicking against marble while Hudson made calls in what sounded like Mandarin. By the time they reached Errol Pharmaceuticals' headquarters, FBI agents were already swarming the building. Simon stood in his former office, surrounded by shredded paper like confetti at the world's worst party. His suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes wild with the kind of desperation that makes men dangerous. "You!" he snarled when he saw Roselle. "You did this! You destroyed everything!" "No," Roselle said, stepping over scattered documents. "You did this. I just documented it." Agent Maria Rodriguez of the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division entered, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Errol, you're under arrest for destruction of evidence in a federal investigation." "This is my company," Simon shouted as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "My family built this." "Your family built it on graves," Hudson said, speaking for the first time. "My sister's among them." Simon's face went white as recognition dawned. You're the one who's been buying our stock. The hostile takeover." "Isn't hostile when the board invites you in," Hudson replied. "Your mother sold me her shares an hour ago. Your father's too ill to oppose it. Your brother James is in Mykonos with your mistress and the baby, spending what's left of your hidden offshore funds." The last part hit Simon like a physical blow. He sagged in the agent's grip, finally understanding the completeness of his defeat. As they led him away, he made one last attempt. "Roselle, please. We loved each other once." She approached him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same scent she'd worn on their wedding day, now poisoned with different memories. "No, Simon. I loved you. You loved the idea of me. A beautiful black woman who gave you credibility, connections, and cover for your crimes. But you never saw me, not really. You never asked about my dreams, my grandmother's legacy, or why I studied psychology. You saw decoration where there was determination, ornament where there was strategy." She pulled out a recorder from her purse, pressing play. Simon's voice filled the room. The Nigerians won't know the vaccines are contaminated. They barely have functioning hospitals, much less testing facilities. Ship them." "That recording is from our anniversary dinner," Roselle said. "You were on the phone in the bathroom. You forgot I was there like you always did." "But I never forgot. I never forgot those children who died. I never forgot the families destroyed. And I never forgot that the man I married was a murderer who wore Armani." The FBI agents took Simon away, but not before Charlotte Errol arrived, her usual composure shattered. She looked between her son in handcuffs and Roselle standing like an avenging angel and made her choice. "The papers are signed," she told Hudson, then turned to Roselle. "I know it doesn't mean much, but I'm sorry. I raised a monster and convinced myself he was just ambitious." "Your apology doesn't resurrect the dead," Roselle replied, "but your cooperation might prevent future deaths." That evening, Roselle stood in the boardroom of Errol Pharmaceuticals, now technically hers, at least in majority. The board members, old white men who'd never taken her seriously at holiday parties, sat silent as she spoke. "Gentlemen, you have two choices. Resign with whatever dignity you can salvage, or stay and help me transform this company into something that saves lives instead of taking them. But understand this. If you stay, every decision will be scrutinized, every contract reviewed, every pill tested twice. We're going to lose money before we make it. Stock prices will plummet before they rise. But we'll sleep at night knowing children aren't dying for our quarterly reports." 7 resigned immediately. 3 stayed, including Dr. Patricia Kim, the only woman who'd been on the board, who stood and slowly applauded. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to say that in this room," Dr. Kim said. "Where do we start?" "Nigeria," Roselle replied. "We're going to replace every contaminated vaccine with safe ones at our cost. Then we're establishing a fund for the victims' families. After that, we're opening every file, every test result, every buried report to independent review." "That could bankrupt us," one of the remaining board members said. "Then we'll build something better from the ashes," Roselle said, thinking of her grandmother, who'd built an empire from nothing but determination and formulas written in kitchen notebooks. Something worthy of the lives in our hands. Chapter 4. The Mistress's Secret. 3 months pregnant and living in her sister's pool house in Marietta, Isla Colette discovered that Instagram followers vanished faster than cheap mascara in rain when scandal struck, from 847,000 followers to 123,000 in 6 weeks. The brand deals evaporated, the yacht invitations dried up, even her blue checkmark seemed dimmer, like Instagram itself was embarrassed by association. She sat on a deflated pool float, watching her phone like it might apologize for ruining her life, when the doorbell rang with the kind of insistence that meant lawyers or worse. It was worse. It was Hudson Vale. He stood at the door like temptation in a Tom Ford suit, holding roses that cost more than her current net worth. The same Hudson Vale she'd met at that pharmaceutical conference in Miami, where Simon had been too busy with negotiations to notice his mistress disappearing for 3 hours with a beautiful stranger. "Hello, Isla," Hudson said, his British accent wrapping around her name like silk. "I thought we should talk about our daughter." Inside Roselle's new office at the transformed Errol Pharmaceuticals, Stella Blackwood was presenting discoveries that made corporate espionage look like children's games. "She's been taking payments from 3 sources," Stella said, sliding documents across the mahogany desk. "Simon, obviously, but also his brother James, starting 8 months ago, and these transfers from a Cayman account that traces back to Hudson Vale." Roselle leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered like promises waiting to be broken. "Show me the timeline." Stella spread out bank statements like tarot cards revealing a fortune of deception. Hudson's payments started before she met Simon. She was hired to seduce him. A honey trap, but she got greedy, started sleeping with James too. The baby could be either of theirs, but definitely not Simon's. Or, Roselle said slowly, a smile playing at her lips, Hudson's playing a longer game. When did his sister really die? Stella's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. Keisha Vale died. Wait, there's no death certificate, no obituary. The hospital records show she was discharged after recovering from insulin shock, not dead. She's alive, living in London under her mother's maiden name. The pieces clicked together in Roselle's mind like a combination lock opening. He's not here for revenge, he's here for the company, and he's using everyone, me, Isla, the FBI, to get it. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she recognized the breath pattern before he spoke. Simon calling from federal detention. "They're offering me a deal," he said without preamble, his voice rough from either screaming or crying, probably both. Full confession for 5 years instead of 25. "Roselle, I know I have no right to ask, but I need to know something." "What?" "Did you ever love me, even for a moment?" Roselle considered lying, then decided he'd suffered enough fiction. "I loved who I thought you were. The man who discussed medical ethics at dinner, who wanted to make medications affordable, who cried when we watched documentaries about children dying from preventable diseases. But that man never existed, did he?" "He did," Simon's voice cracked. "Before the money, before the pressure, before I became my father's son instead of my mother's." "Then mourn him," Roselle said. "Take the deal, serve your time, and maybe find him again." She hung up before he could respond, then called Hudson. "We need to meet," she said, "and bring Isla. It's time we all stopped pretending." The meeting took place at the Four Seasons, in a suite that cost more per night than most Americans made in a month. Roselle arrived first, choosing her position carefully, the chair that put her back to the window, haloing her in afternoon light. Power was half perception, her grandmother had taught her, and perception was all about positioning. Isla arrived looking like she'd dressed in the dark, designer clothes that didn't quite match, pregnancy showing despite her attempts to hide it under Chanel. Hudson followed, and the way Isla's eyes tracked him told Roselle everything about who really fathered that baby. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Roselle began. "Hudson, your sister's alive. Isla, you're carrying Hudson's baby, not James's, and Simon's about to confess to everything, which means this company becomes mine completely unless one of you has a competing claim." Hudson's composure finally cracked, just slightly, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You're remarkable." "I'm prepared," Roselle corrected. "The question is, what do you really want?" "I want in," Hudson said, dropping all pretense. "Not to destroy the company, but to transform it. My sister did nearly die from your husband's negligence. She survived, but 46 others didn't. I've spent 3 years positioning myself to take over, but you got there first. And Isla was supposed to seduce Simon and document his crimes. Instead, she got greedy, slept with his brother, and complicated everything by getting pregnant with my child during what was supposed to be a professional arrangement." Isla's face crumbled. "Professional? You said you loved me." "I said what you needed to hear," Hudson replied with brutal honesty. "Just like you told Simon what he needed to hear. Just like you told James. We're all liars here, except for Roselle. She's the only one who told the truth, which is why she's winning." Roselle stood, moving to the window where Atlanta sprawled below like a kingdom waiting for its queen. "Here's what's going to happen. Hudson, you'll get 20% of the company in exchange for your connections and capital. Isla, you'll get a trust fund for the baby and disappear to raise your child quietly. The moment you try to monetize this scandal, book deal, reality show, tell-all interview, the money stops." "And if we refuse?" Hudson asked. "Then I release everything. The fake death certificate for your sister, the payments to Isla, the shell companies you've been using to manipulate stock prices. You're not the only one who's been investigating, Hudson. The difference is, I don't have to lie about my motives." Hudson laughed, sudden and genuine. "You're wasted on revenge, Roselle. You should be running countries." "I'm starting with a pharmaceutical company. Countries can wait." That evening, Charlotte Errol requested a meeting. She arrived at Roselle's penthouse, looking like she'd aged a decade in 3 months. Her usual perfect composure replaced by something raw and human. "I need to tell you something," she said, accepting the tea Roselle offered, her grandmother's blend, roses and rebellion. "About Simon, about why he became what he is." "I'm listening." "His father built this company on brutality disguised as business. Every lesson was about winning, never about wisdom. When Simon was 12, he found out about contaminated drugs being shipped to Honduras. He wanted to tell someone, stop it. William beat him unconscious, said mercy was weakness, and weakness was death in their world." Charlotte's hands shook as she set down her teacup. "I should have left then, should have taken my boys and run. But I was weak too, seduced by comfort, silenced by luxury. I let my husband turn our sons into monsters, and now one's in prison while the other's spending stolen money on some Greek island." "Why tell me this?" "Because you're going to have children someday," Charlotte said. "And when you do, remember that every choice you make echoes in their futures. Simon wasn't born evil. Evil was installed in him, update by update, until the original operating system was overwritten." After Charlotte left, Roselle sat alone in her grandmother's chair, reading Adeline's journals. One entry, dated 1987, stood out. "Power isn't revenge. Revenge is just the doorway. Power is what you build in the space revenge clears. Make sure what you're building is worth the demolition." Her phone buzzed. A news alert. "Simon Errol pleads guilty to all charges, receives 7-year sentence." Then a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. J.E. James Errol, still in Mykonos but apparently paying attention." Roselle smiled, typing back, "It is for you." She had Penelope freeze every account James had access to, perfectly legal since they were all derived from marital assets under investigation. Within hours, James would discover that his credit cards were dead, his hotel would evict him, and the only way home would be if Isla bought him a ticket with the trust fund money that came with conditions of silence. The last text of the night came from Gabriel Fragrance, her 17-year-old cousin who'd been like a son to her. "Saw the news. Grandma Adeline would say you're not just growing roses anymore, you're growing an entire garden." Roselle looked out at the city lights, each one representing a life that might be saved by the new direction of Errol Pharmaceuticals. Tomorrow, she'd announce free insulin programs for low-income families. Next week, she'd personally fly to Nigeria with replacement vaccines. But tonight, she'd simply be a woman who'd survived betrayal and built something beautiful from its ashes, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's reconstruction. Chapter 5. The Business Alliance. The Ritz-Carlton's presidential suite hosted many power meetings, but none quite like this. Roselle Fragrance, now CEO of Errol Pharmaceuticals, sitting across from 5 of the most powerful black investors in America, the kind of people whose names appeared in Forbes, but whose faces remained strategically unknown. "You want us to invest in a company built on blood," said Nicholson Winters, no relation to her mentor, but carrying the same intensity. His fund controlled $4 billion, enough to buy small countries or large consciences. A company whose previous leadership murdered children for profit margins. "I want you to invest in resurrection," Roselle corrected, her voice steady as her grandmother's hands used to be while mixing formulas. "Every pharmaceutical company has graves in its foundation. The question is whether we build monuments or hospitals on top of them." Penelope had spent 3 weeks preparing this presentation, and now she clicked through slides showing projected profits, all declining for the first 2 years. The investors shifted, uncomfortable with red numbers that looked like arterial spray. "You're showing us losses," said Dr. Patricia Holloway, the only woman among them who'd built her fortune by betting against conventional wisdom and winning. "I'm showing you honesty," Roselle replied. "We're going to recall every questionable product, test everything twice, pay settlements to victims, rebuild from the ground up. Yes, we'll lose money initially, but in 5 years, we'll be the only pharmaceutical company in America that can claim 0 lawsuits, 0 casualties, 0 compromises." "And you think that matters?" Nicholson asked. "I think dead children matter. I think the 47 people Simon Errol murdered for money matter. I think my grandmother, who built an empire selling hope in bottles to black women when nobody else would, matters. But if you need capitalism to make sense of conscience, then consider this. Trust is the only currency that compounds infinitely. Every pill we sell will come with the guarantee that we chose healing over wealth. That's a market position nobody else can claim." Hudson Vale, who'd been silent in the corner like an elegant shadow, finally spoke. "Show them the Nigerian proposal." Roselle nodded to Penelope, who pulled up images that made the room collectively inhale. Children in Lagos holding empty medicine bottles, mothers crying outside hospitals, a mass grave marked with numbers instead of names. "3 weeks from now," Roselle said, "I'm personally flying to Nigeria with $40 million worth of vaccines, insulin, and antibiotics. Free. No strings, no tax write-offs, no publicity tours. We're going to replace every contaminated product Errol Pharmaceuticals ever shipped there, and we're going to do it quietly because atonement doesn't need applause. $40 million when your company's already hemorrhaging money." Dr. Holloway leaned forward, interest sparking in her eyes. $40 million in medicine that costs us $6 million to produce, Roselle corrected. "The markup in pharmaceuticals is criminal, literally in our case. We're going to publish our real costs versus retail prices. Every medication, every pill, full transparency." The room erupted in objections, but Roselle raised one hand, and silence fell like snow. "Transparency is terrifying when you have something to hide. We don't. Not anymore. Every skeleton has been excavated, every crime confessed, every victim acknowledged. We're going to be the first pharmaceutical company that operates like a public trust instead of a private trauma." Nicholson stood, walking to the window where Atlanta's hospital district sprawled below. "You're talking about revolution." "I'm talking about evolution," Roselle said. "My husband thought he could humiliate me with revelation. Instead, he handed me the keys to an empire built on suffering. I can either perpetuate that suffering with better PR, or I can transform it into something my grandmother would have invested in, a company that proves profit and principles aren't mutually exclusive." "What do you need?" Dr. Holloway asked. $200 million in investment. Your connections to historically black colleges for research partnerships, and your influence to ensure that when the old guard tries to destroy us, and they will, we have shields they can't penetrate." Hudson's phone buzzed. He read the message, his expression darkening. "Speaking of the old guard trying to destroy us, James Errol just landed at Hartsfield. He's been posting on social media about taking back his birthright." Roselle smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Let him come." 3 hours later, James Errol stood in what used to be his father's office, now transformed under Roselle's leadership. Gone were the hunting trophies and oil paintings of dead white men. Instead, photographs of the 47 victims lined one wall, a reminder of the cost of corporate greed. The other walls held portraits of black medical pioneers, Dr. Charles Drew, Dr. Patricia Bath, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams. "You've redecorated," James said, trying for casual and achieving desperate. At 30, he looked like a discount version of his brother. Same features, but somehow less substantial, like a photocopy of a photocopy. "I've corrected," Roselle replied from behind the desk, not bothering to stand. "What do you want, James?" "My family's company. The company your family built on murdered children. That company no longer exists. What exists now is something else entirely, something you have no claim to." James pulled out his phone, showing a video. Security footage from that Miami conference, Isla and Hudson in a compromising position. "I have proof that your business partner orchestrated this entire takeover, that he used Isla to destroy my brother." "And?" Roselle's calm was unshakable. "Hudson's methods were questionable, but his motives were pure. Your brother killed his sister, or nearly did. That video shows two consenting adults making choices that led to consequences, rather like your choice to sleep with your brother's mistress. She seduced me. She offered. You accepted, just like you accepted bribes from competitors to share company secrets." "Oh, you didn't know I knew about that?" "Stella's very thorough. Would you like to see the deposits from Nexus Pharmaceuticals into your accounts? The emails where you sold formulas your father spent millions developing?" James's face went white. Industrial espionage carried a 20-year sentence. "Here's what's going to happen," Roselle continued. "You're going to leave, quietly, permanently. You're going to sign away any claim to this company or its assets. In exchange, I won't forward your criminal activities to the FBI, who are already very interested in your family." "You can't." "I can. I have. I will." She stood then, moving around the desk with predatory grace. "Your father built this company on the belief that power meant the ability to destroy without consequence. Your brother inherited that belief and it destroyed him. You have one chance to break the pattern. Take it." James looked around the office, at the victims' photographs, at the woman who dismantled his family's empire with documentation and determination. "My mother was right. You're terrifying." "Your mother was wrong. I'm not terrifying. I'm thorough. There's a difference." After James fled, Hudson entered, applauding slowly. "You know he'll try something stupid. I'm counting on it. Penelope has been monitoring his communications. The moment he violates the terms, he goes to prison. The Errol men always did prefer cells of their own making." That evening, the investor meeting reconvened at Roselle's penthouse. The contracts were spread across her grandmother's dining table, $200 million waiting for signatures. "Before we sign," Nicholson said, "we need to know something. This isn't really about business, is it? This is personal." Roselle picked up one of her grandmother's journals, its leather cover worn smooth by decades of handling. "Everything is personal when you're black in America. My grandmother couldn't get a business loan in 1962, so she sold cosmetics door to door until she could buy her own factory. That was personal. These investors wouldn't fund her expansion in 1975 because she was a black woman, so she grew anyway. That was personal." She opened the journal to a marked page. She wrote, "They think our beauty is only skin deep, not knowing our skin contains multitudes, history, resilience, revolution. Build your empire on that foundation and watch them wonder how roses grow from concrete." Simon Errol thought I was decoration for his life, not knowing I was documenting his crimes. He thought my beauty was my only value, not knowing my brain was my weapon. He handed me this company thinking he was humiliating me, not knowing he was handing me the tools for transformation. Yes, this is personal. Everything that matters is. Dr. Holloway signed first, her signature flowing like prescription for change. The others followed, and just like that, Roselle had the backing to revolutionize American pharmaceuticals. Later that night, alone in her office, she received a call from Nigeria. Dr. Adaora Okonkwo, head of Lagos General Hospital. "Miss Fragrance, we've received your shipment proposal. $40 million in medicine, free of charge. Forgive my skepticism, but what's the catch?" "The catch is that 47 people died because my predecessor chose profit over people. The catch is that I can't resurrect the dead, but I can prevent future deaths. The catch is that every pill comes with a promise: never again. Never again, Dr. Okonkwo repeated, her voice thick with emotion. Do you know what those vaccines did? Not just the deaths, but the fear. Parents stopped trusting medicine. Children died from preventable diseases because their mothers were terrified of another contaminated batch. Then we rebuild that trust. One vaccine, one patient, one promise at a time. When you come to Lagos, you'll be welcomed as family. After the call, Roselle stood at her window, looking out at Atlanta's lights. Somewhere in the federal detention center, Simon was learning that prison was just external confirmation of the cage he'd built himself. Somewhere in a pool house, Isla was discovering that beauty without substance was just surface tension waiting to break. Somewhere, James was probably planning something stupid that would end with handcuffs. But here, in an office that used to reek of cigars and cruelty, Roselle Fragrance was building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Her phone lit up with a message from her mother. Your grandmother would be so proud. You're not just growing roses anymore, you're growing a garden that will bloom for generations. Tomorrow, she'd announce the Nigerian initiative. Next week, she'd face the pharmaceutical board's attempt to revoke her licenses. Next month, she'd testify before Congress about industry reform. But tonight, she'd simply be a woman who'd taken her husband's cruelty and transformed it into compassion, proving that the best revenge wasn't just success, it was significance. Chapter 6. The Family Fortune. William Errol's funeral drew Atlanta's elite like flies to honey, but the honey had gone rancid, and everyone could smell the rot beneath the roses. The patriarch of Errol Pharmaceuticals had died of a heart attack. Stress-induced, the doctors said, though Roselle knew the truth. He'd died of a broken empire. 300 people filled the cathedral, but only a handful mourned. The rest came to witness the complete collapse of a dynasty that had once seemed untouchable. Roselle sat in the fourth row, deliberately visible but not prominent, wearing a black dress that cost more than most people's monthly salaries but looked like simple elegance. Beside her, Hudson Vale served as a shield against the whispers that followed her like smoke. The grieving widow, someone whispered, not bothering to lower their voice enough. She's not grieving, and she's not technically a widow yet, another responded. Simon's still alive in federal prison. Charlotte Errol, dressed in black that seemed to absorb light, stood at the podium delivering a eulogy that was more confession than commemoration. My husband built an empire, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years of marriage to a monster. But empires built on others' bones eventually collapse into the graves they've dug. William died knowing his legacy was murder disguised as medicine. Both his sons are in prison, one for the crimes, one for trying to cover them up. His company belongs to the woman he taught his sons to underestimate. There's poetry in that, though William never did appreciate art that wasn't framed in gold. After the service, the lawyers gathered like vultures with briefcases. The reading of William Errol's will was scheduled for that afternoon, and speculation ran wild about hidden assets, secret accounts, final revenges from beyond the grave. The law offices of Brandenburg, Hollis and Associates had handled the Errol family's legal matters for 60 years, their conference room panelled in wood that had witnessed more betrayals than blessings. Roselle arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Penelope and a court reporter she'd hired to transcribe every word. Charlotte was already there, flanked by her own lawyers. James appeared via video link from federal detention. He'd been arrested 2 days after their confrontation, trying to sell company secrets to Chinese manufacturers. Simon wasn't permitted to attend, though his lawyer, Thornton, sat ready to contest whatever came next. Mr. Brandenburg, ancient and austere, opened the will with hands that trembled not from age, but from anticipation. He'd been waiting 40 years to see this family destroy itself. The last will and testament of William Harrison Errol, dated 6 months ago, notably after his son's arrest but before his death. Roselle noticed the date. William had rewritten his will after Simon's downfall, but before the stress killed him. Interesting. To my wife, Charlotte, I leave the house, the cars, and my personal effects, with one caveat: she must publish her journals from our marriage. All of them. Unedited. Let the world know what manner of man I was, and what manner of woman stayed with such a man. Charlotte's face went pale. Her journals contained 40 years of documented abuse, affairs, and crimes. Publishing them would destroy what little social standing she had left. To my son Simon, I leave my medical library and a trust fund of $1 to be given upon his release from prison. He always wanted to be a doctor before I forced him into business. Perhaps in his remaining years he can learn what healing actually means. Thornton started to object, but Brandenburg continued. To my son James, I leave nothing, as nothing is what he contributed to this family except shame. James's face on the video screen contorted with rage, but his federal guard's presence kept him silent. To Roselle Fragrance, my son's wife, everyone leaned forward. I leave a letter to be read aloud in the presence of all parties. Brandenburg pulled out a sealed envelope, breaking the wax seal with ceremonial precision. William's handwriting, sharp as scalpels, filled the page. Roselle, you destroyed my family with truth, which is more than I ever did with lies. You took my company and transformed it into something I wouldn't recognize, something ethical, something healing, something my mother would have wanted it to be before I corrupted her vision. Yes, Errol Pharmaceuticals was started by my mother, not me. Dr. Elizabeth Errol, who wanted to make medicine affordable for everyone. I killed her dream with greed, but you've resurrected it with revenge, transformed into righteousness. I hated you for it. Then I researched you, your grandmother, Adeline Fragrance. I tried to buy her company in 1987. She laughed in my face, said I wouldn't know quality if it kissed me. She was right. She built something lasting. I built something that's already crumbling. So I leave you the one thing my sons don't know exists, my mother's original laboratory, the one where she developed the formulas I stole and corrupted. It's been sealed for 40 years, but I kept it intact. A shrine to the woman I betrayed by becoming the man I became. The address is below. Perhaps you can find something there worth saving, which is more than can be said for my sons. The room erupted. Simon's lawyer demanded authentication. James screamed about contestation. Charlotte sat silent, tears streaming down her face, the first genuine emotion anyone had seen from her in decades. But Roselle simply stood, took the letter, and walked out. The laboratory sat in an abandoned building in Decatur, looking like nothing from the outside. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, the kind of place people avoided after dark. But the basement, sealed behind 3 layers of security William had maintained for 40 years, was a perfectly preserved time capsule. Dr. Elizabeth Errol's laboratory looked like something from a different era, handwritten formulas covering the walls, beakers and bottles still arranged, as if she'd just stepped out for lunch and never returned. Photographs covered one wall. Elizabeth, with young black and brown children she'd treated for free. Elizabeth at civil rights marches. Elizabeth shaking hands with Dr. King. My God, Hudson said, having insisted on accompanying her for safety. She was everything William wasn't. Roselle found Elizabeth's journals, dozens of them, filled with formulas and philosophy in equal measure. One entry stood out. Medicine without mercy is just expensive poison. If we can't heal the poor, we've failed as doctors. If we can't serve the vulnerable, we've failed as humans. William doesn't understand this. He sees dollars where I see daughters, profit where I see people. I fear what he'll become when I'm gone. Her fears had been prophetic. Elizabeth died when William was 32, Simon's current age, and he'd immediately transformed her community clinic into a corporate empire. Look at this, Penelope said, photographing formula after formula. These are revolutionary. medications that could be produced for pennies but work better than current drugs costing hundreds. She was 60 years ahead of her time, Roselle said, running her fingers over Elizabeth's handwriting. William buried this because he couldn't monetize mercy. Her phone rang. Charlotte Errol. You found it, Charlotte said without preamble. You knew. I helped William seal it. My greatest shame among many. Elizabeth was my mentor. She's the one who recommended William marry me, thought I could keep him human. Instead, he made me monstrous. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Because I was a coward. Because I chose comfort over conscience. Because by the time I realized what we'd become, we were already damned. But you're not. You can take Elizabeth's work and finish it. That evening, Roselle called a press conference at Errol Pharmaceuticals, now officially renamed Fragrance Errol Medical. She stood before reporters holding Elizabeth Errol's journal, flanked by photographs of the 47 victims and Elizabeth's community work. Today, I discovered that Errol Pharmaceuticals was built on a double betrayal, not just of the people it killed, but of the woman who founded it with the intention to heal. Dr. Elizabeth Errol created formulas that could have saved millions, but her son buried them because suffering was more profitable than solutions. She opened the journal, reading Elizabeth's words. Every child deserves medicine regardless of their parents' income. Every person deserves dignity regardless of their zip code. This is not radical, this is human. Starting tomorrow, we're releasing all of Dr. Elizabeth Errol's formulas to the public domain. No patents, no exclusivity, no profit. Any company, anywhere in the world can produce these medications. We estimate this will make 70% of common medications affordable to everyone within 2 years. The reporters erupted with questions, but one voice cut through. You're destroying your own company's value. Roselle smiled, thinking of her grandmother, of Elizabeth, of all the women who'd built things only to watch men corrupt them for profit. I'm destroying William Errol's value system, but I'm building something priceless, a world where children don't die because their parents are poor, where medicine isn't held hostage by stock prices, where healing isn't a luxury item. If that destroys the company's value, then it wasn't valuable to begin with. Later that night, she stood in Elizabeth's laboratory with Hudson, Penelope, and surprisingly Charlotte, who'd come to say goodbye to the space she'd helped hide. The board will revolt, Charlotte warned. The investors will sue. The industry will try to destroy you. Let them try, Roselle said, holding Elizabeth's photograph, a black and white image of a woman who looked remarkably like Roselle herself, strong and determined and unafraid. I have something they don't. The truth, the formulas, and the support of everyone who's ever lost someone to pharmaceutical greed. Hudson's phone buzzed. He read the message and smiled. The Nigerian government just announced they're providing free laboratory space for any company willing to produce Elizabeth's formulas for African distribution. China's following suit. India's already started production. It's begun, Penelope said, watching her phone light up with alerts. The revolution Elizabeth wanted is finally happening. Charlotte stood to leave, then paused. Roselle, I'm publishing my journals as William demanded. All of them. The abuse, the affairs, the crimes I witnessed and stayed silent about. It will destroy me socially, but maybe it will save someone else from making my choices. That's brave, Roselle said, meaning it. No, brave is what you're doing. I'm just finally choosing confession over comfort. After everyone left, Roselle remained in Elizabeth's laboratory, surrounded by the work of a woman who'd been erased by the man who should have protected her legacy. She thought about Simon sitting in prison, probably hearing about this press conference. She thought about James, facing 20 years for industrial espionage. She thought about William, dead from the weight of his own evil. But mostly, she thought about Elizabeth Errol and Adeline Fragrance, two women who'd never met but shared the same vision. That healing shouldn't have a price tag. That medicine should be mercy. that women could build better empires than men because they understood that power meant lifting others, not stepping on them. Tomorrow, she'd face the board's revolt. Next week, she'd battle lawsuits from pharmaceutical companies who saw her releasing the formulas as declaration of war. Next month, she'd testify before Congress about why America needed universal health care. But tonight, in a laboratory that had been a tomb for 40 years, Roselle Fragrance was resurrecting more than formulas. She was resurrecting hope, proving that sometimes the greatest fortune isn't money, but the ability to transform murder into medicine, greed into grace, and revenge into revolution. Chapter 7. The Brothers' Betrayal. James Errol thought federal prison would break him, but he'd forgotten that Errol men had been building cages for themselves long before the government provided them. He sat in the visitors' room at Atlanta Federal Detention Center, wearing orange that made his skin look sallow, watching his lawyer, Nicholson, because of course even now he'd chosen the most expensive attorney money he no longer had could buy, spread documents across the scratched table like tarot cards, predicting doom. "She's given everything away," Nicholson said, disbelief threading through his professionally neutral voice. "The formulas, the patents, the competitive advantages. Stock value has dropped 90%. "Good," James said, surprising himself with the venom in his voice. "Let her destroy what my father built. You don't understand. Without value, there's nothing to inherit, even if you could contest the will. You're facing 20 years for industrial espionage. Your trust fund is frozen, and the only asset you have left is information." Information? About her, Roselle. There must be something, some secret, some leverage, something that could force a settlement. James laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls that had heard every variation of desperate laughter. "You want dirt on Roselle Fragrance? The woman who documented every sin my family committed while serving us dinner? She doesn't have secrets, she has strategies." Meanwhile, in her office, Elizabeth Errol's former laboratory, now transformed into a working space where medicine met mercy, Roselle was meeting with someone she'd never expected to see again. Isla Colette, 7 months pregnant, and looking like motherhood had replaced Instagram filters with something real. "I need help," Isla said without preamble, her usual affected accent replaced by traces of Alabama roots she'd spent years hiding. "James is threatening you," Roselle said. Not a question, but a statement. She'd been monitoring communications from the prison, perfectly legal, since James had been foolish enough to use the phone system she now controlled as majority shareholder. "He says he'll reveal everything about Hudson and me, unless I lie about you in court. Say you orchestrated everything, that you planted me with Simon, that you destroyed the company deliberately." Roselle leaned back in Elizabeth's old chair, studying the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage, but might now help destroy what was left of the Errol legacy. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell the truth," Isla said, one hand on her swollen belly. "This baby deserves better than the lies that created her. Hudson's agreed to support us, but only if I testify honestly. I'm tired of being everyone's weapon. I just want to be someone's mother." "Then be honest. James can't hurt you from federal prison, and any testimony you give will be under protection. He says he has video of you and Hudson." "So what? 2 adults had consensual relations. You weren't married. Neither was he. The scandal has already played out. There's nothing left to expose." Isla's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion Roselle had ever seen from her. "Why are you helping me? I destroyed your marriage. Simon destroyed our marriage the moment he chose profit over people. You were just the excuse he used. But you're carrying an innocent child who doesn't deserve to suffer for her parents' choices. That's why I'm helping." That afternoon, Hudson arrived with news that changed everything. "James made a deal," he said, setting his tablet on Roselle's desk. He's testifying that you knew about the contaminated vaccines before marrying Simon, that you married him specifically to destroy the company from within, that this entire thing was premeditated corporate sabotage. Roselle studied the deposition transcript, her mind calculating angles like her grandmother used to calculate formulas. He's lying. Obviously. But it's a compelling lie. You did study psychology with a focus on corporate behavior. You did keep extensive documentation. You did marry him despite knowing his nature. I married him because I loved him, Roselle interrupted, the words tasting like ash but needing to be said. I documented everything because my mentor, Dr. Winters, taught me to always keep records. I studied corporate psychology because I wanted to understand power structures. None of that was about Simon until he made it about survival. Her phone rang. Charlotte Errol. Have you seen James's deposition? Charlotte asked. I'm reading it now. It's fiction. But fiction that will resonate with a jury already skeptical of a black woman taking over a white family's company. You need ammunition. What kind of ammunition? The kind only a mother has. Come to the house tonight. Bring Hudson and your lawyer. It's time I showed you what William never knew I kept. The Errol estate in Buckhead looked like a mausoleum for the living. 22 rooms of marble and misery, where Charlotte now lived alone, except for staff who stayed out of loyalty to her, not the name. She led them to William's study, a room that reeked of cigars and cruelty even after his death. Behind a portrait of William's father, another Errol who'd believed money mattered more than morality, was a safe Charlotte opened with practiced ease. William thought he was clever, keeping secrets. He never realized I was keeping them too. She pulled out drives, documents, recordings, 40 years of evidence William thought he'd destroyed. This, she said, holding up a flash drive, is James at 17, offering to sell his father's formulas to competitors. Not the recent espionage. The pattern started half his lifetime ago. This, another drive, is Simon and James discussing how to frame Roselle for embezzlement if she ever tried to leave. They recorded themselves planning crimes because they thought they were untouchable. Hudson picked up a photograph. James at a pharmaceutical conference in Bangkok, exchanging briefcases with known black market dealers. He was selling contaminated drugs directly to criminal organizations. For years, Charlotte confirmed. William knew but covered it up because confronting it would damage stock prices. But I kept everything, waiting for the right moment. This is that moment. Why? Roselle asked. Why help me destroy your son? Because he was destroyed long before you arrived. You're just refusing to let him take innocent people with him. And because Elizabeth... Charlotte picked up a photograph from the safe, showing a young Charlotte with Dr. Elizabeth Errol, both smiling at a community clinic. She was my friend before she was my mother-in-law. She'd want someone to stop the monster her son became, both her son and grandsons. That night, Roselle's legal team worked until dawn, preparing a countersuit that would end James Errol permanently. By morning, every news outlet had the story. James Errol, already facing 20 years for industrial espionage, was now charged with international drug trafficking, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted witness tampering. His lawyer, Nicholson, withdrew from the case immediately, stating irreconcilable differences that everyone understood meant guilty beyond defense. James made one last desperate attempt, calling Roselle from federal detention on a recorded line, apparently forgetting or not caring that every word was evidence. "You've destroyed everything," he said, his voice raw with rage. "I've revealed everything," Roselle corrected. "There's a difference. My father's legacy was built on the bones of children. It deserved to die. And what about my legacy? You don't have one. You're a footnote in your father's story, a cautionary tale about what happens when privilege meets pathology. Your only contribution to history will be serving as evidence of how corrupt your family became." "Isla won't testify. I know things. Isla testified this morning, under oath, with Hudson beside her. She told the truth about everything, how you approached her first, how you've been threatening her, how you tried to use her baby as leverage. You have nothing left to bargain with. Silence stretched between them, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes they've lost everything. This isn't over, James finally said. Yes, it is. You're going to take a plea deal for 30 years combining all charges. You'll be 60 when you get out, if you get out. The company will be transformed beyond recognition. Your family name will be synonymous with pharmaceutical genocide. And the woman you tried to frame will be remembered as the one who chose healing over hatred. She hung up before he could respond. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 members of the Errol Pharmaceuticals board who'd survived the restructuring, led by Dr. Patricia Kim, the only woman who'd been on the original board. We've been discussing your announcement about releasing Elizabeth's formulas, Dr. Kim said. We have concerns. I'm sure you do, Roselle replied, gesturing for them to sit in her office, where Elizabeth's photographs now watched over every decision. The stock has crashed. We're facing 17 lawsuits from other pharmaceutical companies. The FDA is considering unprecedented regulations based on your transparency initiatives. You're destroying the industry. I'm destroying the industry's ability to murder for money. If that's the same thing, then the industry needed destroying. Be that as it may, one of the board members, Mr. Davidson, interrupted, we have a fiduciary duty to shareholders. Our fiduciary duty is to humanity, Roselle cut him off. Every share of stock represents someone's investment in healing. If they invested expecting blood money, they chose poorly. You can't simply, I can, I have, I will. She stood, moving to the window where the Centers for Disease Control building was visible in the distance. In 3 days, I'm announcing a partnership with the CDC to provide free vaccines to every child in America whose family can't afford them. We'll take the loss. Consider it reparations for the children your previous leadership killed. The board won't approve this, Davidson said. The board doesn't need to. I have majority control, and I've already signed the contracts. You can stay and be part of transformation, or leave and be remembered as someone who valued wealth over wellness. Choose. Dr. Kim stood first. I've been waiting 20 years for someone with the courage to do what's right instead of what's profitable. You have my support. The 2 men left without another word, but Dr. Kim remained. You know they'll try to remove you, she said. They can try. But I have Charlotte's evidence, Isla's testimony, Hudson's resources, and most importantly, public support. Every parent who's ever had to choose between medicine and rent is on my side. That's a voting bloc no board can overcome. That evening, Roselle stood in what had been William Errol's office, now transformed into a memorial for Elizabeth Errol's vision. Hudson joined her, carrying champagne that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. James took the plea deal, he said. 30 years, no parole possibility for 20. He'll die in prison. Or live long enough to see everything his father built transformed into everything his grandmother wanted, Roselle replied, accepting the champagne but not drinking yet. And Simon? 7 years, with possibility of early release if he cooperates with ongoing investigations. He might actually learn something about redemption. And us? Hudson asked, the question carrying weight beyond business. Roselle looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since this began. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were, intelligent in the way that could build or destroy with equal ease. We're business partners, she said carefully. Nothing more. Nothing more yet, he corrected, smiling in a way that suggested patience was just another form of strategy. Her phone buzzed, a message from Dr. Adaora Okonkwo in Nigeria. The first 1,000 children have been vaccinated with your donated medicines. No reactions, no complications, only recovery. You've given us hope." Roselle raised her champagne glass, not to Hudson, but to Elizabeth's photograph, to her grandmother's memory, to all the women who'd been erased, so men could build empires on their bones. "To the brothers who betrayed," she said, "and the women who rebuilt." Chapter 8. The Corporate Takeover. The boardroom at Fragrance Errol Medical had been redesigned to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows that made visitors feel exposed, a table carved from a single piece of Nigerian ebony that Roselle had imported specifically for this moment, and 47 candles burning in remembrance of the dead, their flames reflected infinitely in the polished surface. Davidson and Mitchell, the two board members who'd opposed her reforms, sat at one end with their lawyers arrayed like armor. At the other end, Roselle presided with a queen's confidence, flanked by Dr. Patricia Kim and 3 new board members she'd appointed. All women, all brilliant, all tired of watching pharmaceutical companies choose profit over people. "This emergency meeting has been called to vote on the removal of Roselle Fragrance as CEO," Davidson announced, his voice carrying the kind of entitlement that came from 50 years of never being told no. "On what grounds?" Roselle asked, though she'd already seen their filing, already prepared her response, already won this war before they'd fired their first shot. "Destruction of shareholder value. Since you took control, stock prices have dropped 93%. You've given away patents worth billions. You've made decisions without board approval." "I've made decisions that save lives," Roselle interrupted. "If that destroys value, then we were valuable for the wrong reasons." Mitchell stood, his face red with the kind of anger that preceded either heart attacks or lawsuits. "You've turned this company into a charity." "I've turned this company into what Elizabeth Errol intended, a place where healing matters more than profit. But if you want to discuss numbers, let's discuss them." She nodded to Dr. Kim, who activated the presentation screen. "Since I took control," Roselle began, "we've vaccinated 40,000 children in Nigeria, 14,000 in Bangladesh, and 8,000 in Haiti, all with medicines we donated. The public relations value alone is worth 200 million in advertising we didn't have to buy." "Public relations doesn't pay dividends," Davidson spat, "but public trust does. Our new malaria vaccine, produced at cost and distributed for free in Africa, has generated so much goodwill that 17 nations have signed exclusive contracts for our other medications. We've lost money on vaccines, but gained markets worth 10 times that in long-term revenue." "Long-term," Mitchell said mockingly. "Shareholders want profits now." "Then they should have invested in companies that weren't built on child murder," Roselle replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Every shareholder knew what this company did. They profited from blood money. Now they're upset that blood money has been replaced by actual medicine." The door opened, and Hudson Vale entered with a presence that changed the room's atmosphere, like a storm front moving in. Behind him came 5 people Roselle recognized from Forbes's billionaire lists. Investors who usually remained invisible, but were making an exception for this battle. "Mr. Vale doesn't have standing in this meeting," Davidson protested. "Actually, I do," Hudson replied, setting a folder on the table. "As of this morning, I own 38% of Fragrance Errol Medical shares, purchased from shareholders who understood that transformation requires temporary sacrifice. That, combined with Roselle's 17%, gives us majority control," Dr. Kim added, barely suppressing a smile. "You orchestrated this," Mitchell accused. "I orchestrated accountability," Hudson corrected, "something this board has lacked for 40 years. Davidson's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but the mathematics were simple. They'd lost before the meeting began. "I call for a vote," Roselle said. "All in favor of my removal." Davidson and Mitchell raised their hands, alone in their rebellion. All opposed. Every other hand rose, including the 5 new investors Hudson had brought. "Motion defeated," Roselle announced. "Now, I have a motion of my own. The immediate removal of Davidson and Mitchell from this board for violations of fiduciary duty." "You can't," Davidson started. "I can. The evidence is comprehensive." She opened her folder, pulling out document after document. "Mr. Davidson, you've been shorting our stock while serving on the board, betting against the company you swore to protect. That's securities fraud. Mr. Mitchell, you've been feeding information to our competitors, violating 17 NDAs. That's corporate espionage." Both men went pale. "You have 2 choices," Roselle continued. "Resign immediately with whatever dignity you can salvage, or face criminal prosecution that will end with you sharing cell blocks with James and Simon Errol." They resigned. The papers were signed within minutes, their retreat so hasty that Mitchell left his Mont Blanc pen on the table, a $10,000 writing instrument abandoned in panic. After they fled, the new board composition was official: 7 women, 3 men, led by Roselle with Hudson as vice chair. The most diverse pharmaceutical board in American history, and the only one with a mandate to prioritize healing over wealth. "We should celebrate, Doctor," Kim suggested. "Not yet," Roselle said. "There's one more piece of business." She pulled out her phone, dialing a number she'd memorized but never used. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Roselle," Simon said from federal prison. His voice different, smaller, humbled, human in a way it hadn't been during their marriage. "I'm putting you on speaker, Simon. The board is here." A pause, then, "Why?" "Because you have a choice to make. Your lawyer has been trying to appeal your sentence based on claims that I manipulated you into committing crimes. That's obviously false, but it could drag through courts for years. Or you can do something unprecedented." "What?" "Testify, completely, honestly, about everything Errol Pharmaceuticals did under your and your father's leadership. Every crime, every cover-up, every death. Help us identify all the victims so we can compensate their families. Help us understand the network of corruption so we can dismantle it entirely. And in return? In return, I support your early release petition. Not forgiveness, redemption. You serve 3 more years instead of 7, but those years include mandatory service in our free clinics, seeing firsthand the communities your decisions destroyed." The silence stretched so long that people began shifting in their seats. Finally, Simon spoke. "I'll do it." "Why?" Roselle asked, genuinely curious. "Because I'm tired of being my father's son. Maybe it's time I tried being my grandmother's grandson instead. Elizabeth, she would have hated what we became." "She did hate it." Charlotte's voice came through. She'd been listening on another line. "I've been visiting her grave every week for 40 years, apologizing for letting William corrupt her legacy. This is the first week I won't have to apologize." After the call ended, the room sat in silence that felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, charged with change about to arrive. "You're really going to help him get early release?" Hudson asked. "I'm going to help him become someone worth releasing," Roselle corrected. "There's a difference between punishment and transformation. My grandmother taught me that roses grow best in soil that's been turned over, aired out, given a chance to regenerate." That afternoon, news of the board victory spread through the medical community like antibiotics through an infection. Roselle's phone buzzed with congratulations from doctors, researchers, and activists who'd been fighting pharmaceutical greed for decades. But the most important message came from Isla, now 8 months pregnant. "Watched the news. You won. Thank you for showing my daughter that women can build empires on something other than men's approval." That evening, Roselle stood in Elizabeth Errol's restored laboratory, now a functioning research space where graduate students from Morehouse and Spelman were developing medications that would cost pennies to produce. Hudson joined her, carrying Chinese takeout that seemed absurdly normal after the day's corporate warfare. "You know Davidson and Mitchell won't go quietly," he said, setting out containers of lo mein and orange chicken. "I'm counting on it. Every attack they make proves we're threatening the right people. Every lawsuit they file brings more attention to what pharmaceutical companies have been doing for decades. And if they win something, if they find a legal technicality..." Roselle picked up one of Elizabeth's journals, reading an entry from 1963. "They will try to stop us with laws written by those who profit from suffering. But healing is older than law, stronger than greed, more persistent than any system designed to contain it." Elizabeth knew, Roselle said. She knew that doing right would always threaten those who profit from wrong, but she did it anyway. She saved lives until they stopped her. Now I'm going to continue her work, and they can try to stop me too. But I have something she didn't. What's that? Evidence of their crimes, resources they can't match, and a generation of people tired of choosing between medicine and rent. Elizabeth was ahead of her time. "I'm exactly on time." Her phone rang, an unknown international number. "Ms. Fragrance." The voice was elderly, accented, German or Austrian. "My name is Dr. Hans Zimmermann. I worked with Elizabeth Errol in 1968 on formulas that could have eliminated insulin dependence for diabetics. William buried our research when he took over. I'm 83 years old, and I've been waiting 50 years for someone to continue our work. I heard what you're doing. I want to help." "Send me everything," Roselle said immediately. "Every note, every formula, every memory. We're going to finish what you and Elizabeth started." After the call, Hudson studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're really going to change everything, aren't you?" "No," Roselle said, thinking of her grandmother mixing formulas in her kitchen, of Elizabeth fighting for community clinics, of all the women whose work had been erased or corrupted by men who thought profit mattered more than people. "I'm going to restore everything to what it should have been. There's a difference between revolution and restoration. Revolution destroys the old. Restoration remembers what the old was supposed to be before greed corrupted it." Outside, Atlanta's skyline glittered with lights that looked like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere in federal prison, Simon was learning that redemption was harder than revenge. Somewhere in a nursery, Isla was preparing for a daughter who would grow up in a world where women ran pharmaceutical companies that actually healed. Somewhere in Nigeria, children were surviving diseases that had killed their siblings just months before. "The takeover's complete," Hudson said. "No," Roselle corrected, looking at Elizabeth's photograph, at her grandmother's journals, at the future spreading before them like medicine, finally reaching those who needed it most. "The takeover was just the beginning. Now comes the transformation." Chapter 9. The Final Gambit. October arrived in Atlanta with the kind of heat that made devils of decent people, but in the air-conditioned sanctuary of Fragrance Errol Medical's headquarters, Roselle Fragrance was discovering that devils sometimes came dressed in designer suits carrying court orders. "They're calling it Operation Restoration," Penelope said, spreading legal documents across the conference table like tarot cards predicting disaster. "Davidson, Mitchell, and 17 other pharmaceutical companies have formed a coalition. They're suing to invalidate your control, claiming mental incompetence, undue influence, and corporate sabotage." "Mental incompetence?" Roselle laughed, the sound sharp as surgical instruments. "Because only an insane woman would choose healing over profit?" "They have a psychiatrist willing to testify that your decisions show signs of trauma-induced psychosis from Simon's betrayal. They're painting you as a woman scorned, destroying an empire out of emotional revenge rather than business logic." Hudson entered, carrying a tablet showing news coverage that was shifting like sand in a storm. "They're winning the narrative war. Angry ex-wife destroys American institution, plays better than corrupt company finally held accountable." But Roselle was smiling, the kind of expression that made board members nervous and adversaries terrified. They want to play psychiatry. Perfect. Penelope, call Dr. Matteo Winters. Tell him it's time. Time for what? Time to reveal what we've been building while they've been destroying. 3 days later, the coalition's lawyers gathered in federal court, confident in their numerical superiority and historical precedent. Davidson sat in the gallery like a vulture waiting for something to die, while Mitchell whispered to reporters about the tragedy of emotional women in business. Judge Patricia Holloway, no relation to the investor but sharing the same intolerance for bullshit, presided with the kind of gravitas that made lawyers remember why they'd feared law school. This emergency injunction seeks to remove Roselle Fragrance from leadership of Fragrance Errol Medical pending psychiatric evaluation, the coalition's lead attorney, Harrison Blackwood, announced. We have evidence of erratic behavior, destructive decision-making, and actions that suggest mental instability. Present your evidence, Judge Holloway ordered. Blackwood began with financial charts showing the company's stock collapse, then moved to Roselle's bizarre decisions to give away patents, provide free medications, and publish proprietary formulas. No rational business person would destroy billions in value, he argued. This is clearly the action of someone suffering from psychological trauma. Then came their star witness, Dr. Richard Stenbridge, a psychiatrist who'd never met Roselle, but felt qualified to diagnose her from a distance. The pattern is clear, he testified. Sudden generosity, disregard for financial consequences, obsession with perceived injustices, all symptoms of acute stress disorder potentially evolving into delusional thinking. Roselle's lawyer started to object, but she placed a hand on his arm, standing herself. Your Honor, may I respond directly? This is highly irregular, Blackwood protested. So is diagnosing someone you've never met, Judge Holloway replied. Ms. Fragrance, you may speak. Roselle moved to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who'd already won, but was enjoying the journey to victory. Dr. Stenbridge, you testified that giving away valuable assets indicates mental instability. Are you familiar with the Gates Foundation? That's different. Is it? They've given away billions. Are they mentally ill? What about Warren Buffett's pledge to donate 99% of his wealth? Is that acute stress disorder? Stenbridge shifted uncomfortably. The context is that when billionaire white men give away fortunes, they're philanthropists. When a black woman does it, she's psychotic. Is that your professional opinion? I didn't say you didn't have to. Roselle turned to address the court. Your Honor, I'd like to present my own psychiatric evaluation, conducted by someone who actually examined me. Dr. Matteo Winters entered, his presence commanding respect, earned through 40 years of practice and teaching. He carried a folder that seemed to glow with vindication. I've been conducting monthly psychological evaluations of Ms. Fragrance for the past 2 years at her request to document her mental state throughout this ordeal, he testified. She shows no signs of mental illness. In fact, she exhibits extraordinary emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and ethical consistency rare in corporate leadership. But the financial losses, Blackwood sputtered, are deliberate and calculated, Dr. Winters continued. Every decision Ms. Fragrance has made follows a coherent strategy, transform a company built on exploitation into one built on ethical medical practice. That some people find ethics incompatible with business says more about them than about her mental state. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Ms. Fragrance, explain your strategy. Roselle pulled out her tablet, connecting it to the courtroom's display system. Your Honor, while these gentlemen have been suing me, claiming I'm destroying value, here's what's actually been happening. The screen showed medical facilities across Africa, Asia, and South America. We've established 73 clinics in underserved areas using the money we saved by cutting executive bonuses and eliminating marketing manipulation. New images, children receiving vaccines, diabetics getting insulin, cancer patients accessing chemotherapy. We've treated 1.3 million patients in 6 months. Our customer satisfaction is 97%. Our brand recognition in emerging markets has increased 400%. We've received preliminary approval for 12 new drugs that traditional companies wouldn't develop because the profit margins were too low. She clicked to financial projections. Yes, our stock price collapsed, but our actual revenue is projected to triple within 18 months as these markets mature. We're not destroying value. We're relocating it from shareholders' portfolios to patients' lives. That's not how capitalism works, Davidson shouted from the gallery. Then capitalism needs updating, Roselle replied. Your Honor, these men aren't concerned about mental illness. They're terrified that I'm proving their entire business model, profiting from suffering, is both evil and unnecessary. Harrison Blackwood made one last attempt. Your Honor, regardless of her intentions, Ms. Fragrance has violated fiduciary duty to shareholders. Actually, Hudson interrupted, standing with theatrical timing, she hasn't. I represent the majority shareholders now, and we're extremely satisfied with Ms. Fragrance's leadership. We invested knowing her plans, supporting them, believing that long-term ethical success surpasses short-term exploitative profit. He produced documents, signed affidavits from shareholders representing 63% of shares, explicitly supporting Ms. Fragrance's strategies and rejecting this injunction. Judge Holloway looked at the coalition's lawyers with barely concealed contempt. Let me understand this. You're asking me to remove a CEO for making ethical decisions that the majority of shareholders support based on a psychiatric diagnosis from a doctor who's never met her, contradicted by a doctor who has... The law, Blackwood began. The law doesn't require companies to be evil, Judge Holloway interrupted. Injunction denied, case dismissed with prejudice. And Mr. Blackwood, if you file another frivolous lawsuit attempting to pathologize ethical behavior, I'll refer you to the bar for sanctions. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed to file stories. Davidson and Mitchell stormed out. Their last gambit failed. But Roselle remained calm, knowing this was just the visible victory. The real triumph was happening in boardrooms across the country. That evening, she stood in her office with Hudson, Penelope, Dr. Kim, and surprisingly, Charlotte Errol, who'd become an unexpected ally in transformation. They'll try again, Charlotte warned. Men like Davidson don't accept defeat. Let them, Roselle said, looking at the wall of photographs. Elizabeth Errol, her grandmother Adeline, the 47 victims, the children saved by their new programs. Every attack brings more attention to what we're doing. Every lawsuit creates more publicity for our mission. Her phone buzzed. A message from Simon in federal prison. Watch the news. You destroyed them with truth. I destroyed everything with lies. I'm beginning to understand the difference. He's learning, Hudson observed, reading over her shoulder. People can change, Roselle said. Companies can transform. Systems can evolve. That's what terrifies Davidson and his coalition. Not that we're failing, but that we're succeeding. Dr. Kim raised her glass of champagne. To the final gambit that wasn't final at all. To the transformation that's just beginning, Roselle corrected. Later, alone in Elizabeth's laboratory where she did her best thinking, Roselle found a hidden drawer in Elizabeth's old desk. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed simply, "To who continues my work." She opened it carefully, finding Elizabeth's handwriting still clear after 60 years. If you're reading this, you've found my laboratory and hopefully my formulas. You're probably facing opposition from those who profit from suffering. They'll call you crazy, emotional, irrational. They called me the same, but healing isn't irrational. Compassion isn't crazy. Choosing lives over profit isn't emotional. It's evolution. They'll try to stop you with laws, with lies, with every tool power provides. But remember, medicine existed before money, healing existed before corporations, and compassion existed before capitalism. You're not destroying anything. You're remembering what we're supposed to be. Continue the work, perfect the formulas, save the lives, and when they call you insane for choosing healing over wealth, remember that their sanity has killed more people than any madness ever could. With hope for the future, Dr. Elizabeth Errol. Roselle held the letter against her chest, feeling the weight of legacy and the lightness of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Davidson was already planning something. She could feel it like storms approaching. Simon would testify, revealing more crimes. Isla would give birth, creating new life from old chaos. But tonight, in a laboratory that had been a tomb and was now a resurrection, Roselle Fragrance stood as proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but transformation, not violence, but victory through virtue, not breaking but building. The final gambit hadn't been about winning a court case. It had been about proving that business could be both profitable and principled, that companies could heal instead of harm, that a black woman could take a white dynasty's corruption and transform it into compassion. And she'd won. Chapter 10. The Rose's Victory. The boardroom fills with the kind of tension that makes atoms split and empires fall. Roselle Fragrance stands at the head of the table, wearing a suit the color of dried blood, appropriate, considering how much has been spilled to reach this moment. 8 months since her birthday humiliation, the company her husband's family built on graves has been transformed into something that saves lives. But today, everything could crumble with whatever trick Davidson has orchestrated. He enters like victory personified, carrying a leather folder that might as well be a loaded weapon. Behind him, Mitchell and 3 lawyers she doesn't recognize, their faces sharp with the kind of hunger that comes from billing $1,000 hours. They're followed by someone unexpected, Isla Colette, holding her 2-month-old daughter, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Davidson announces, not waiting for invitation, "I have evidence that will invalidate every decision Ms. Fragrance has made as CEO." Hudson tenses beside her, but Roselle remains perfectly still, her mind calculating angles like her grandmother used to calculate formulas, precisely, patiently, with complete confidence in chemistry. "These documents," Davidson continues, spreading papers across the ebony table, "prove that Roselle Fragrance isn't legally divorced from Simon Errol. Their divorce was never finalized due to a technicality. Simon's signature was dated incorrectly, making the entire proceeding invalid. The room inhales collectively. If she's still legally married to Simon, a convicted felon, corporate law could prevent her from holding executive positions in the company. Furthermore, Davidson's smile could cut glass. As his legal wife, she's potentially liable for his crimes. The FBI could freeze all her assets, including her shares in this company, pending investigation. Roselle examines the documents, her expression revealing nothing. The signatures, the dates, the notary seals, all legitimate. Davidson has done his homework. "Isla here," Davidson gestures to the young woman, "is willing to testify that you knew about the invalid divorce, that you've been deliberately hiding it to maintain control." "I'm sorry," Isla whispers, not meeting Roselle's eyes. "He threatened to take my baby, said he had evidence I was an unfit mother." This is the moment where everything should collapse. The board members shift nervously, already calculating their exits. Hudson's hand moves toward his phone, probably to call lawyers. Even Dr. Kim looks concerned. But Roselle laughs. Not the bitter laugh of defeat or the nervous laugh of fear, but the deep, genuine laugh of someone who's just watched their opponent walk into a trap they set 8 months ago. "Oh, Davidson," she says, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "You beautiful, predictable fool." She pulls out her own folder, slim, elegant, containing just 3 documents. First, let's address the divorce. You're right, Simon's signature was dated incorrectly, January 3rd instead of January 13th, a technicality that would normally invalidate the proceedings. Davidson's grin widens. Except, Roselle continues, in the state of Georgia, when one party is incarcerated for felony crimes against the other party, divorce proceedings can be validated retroactively by judge's order, which Judge Holloway did. She checks her watch. 43 minutes ago, when my lawyer presented her with evidence of Simon's attempted financial abuse during our marriage. She slides the first document across the table, a freshly signed judicial order. But let's say that wasn't enough, she continues. Let's pretend I'm still married to Simon. Georgia corporate law does prevent spouses of convicted felons from serving as executives, unless the company's board votes to exempt them based on extraordinary circumstances. The second document emerges. This vote was taken 6 months ago in a closed session, unanimously approving my exemption should this exact situation arise. Every board member signed it. Even you, Davidson, though you've apparently forgotten. His face drains of color as he recognizes his own signature. But here's the beautiful part, Roselle says, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow fills the room. The first twist in your downfall. She turns to Isla. You don't have to lie for him anymore. Show them what you showed me this morning. With shaking hands, Isla pulls out her phone, playing a recording of Davidson from 3 days ago. I don't care if the divorce papers are real or fake. We'll make them look invalid. That stupid girl will testify to whatever I tell her, or I'll make sure she never sees her baby again. Extortion, Hudson says quietly. Witness tampering. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Which brings us to the second twist, Roselle continues, now standing, moving around the table like a predator who's already fed but enjoys the hunt. Davidson, you were so focused on destroying me that you never asked the right question. What question? He manages, his voice cracking. Who's been buying your debt? She produces the third document. Every loan you've taken to fund this legal assault, every mortgage on your properties, every line of credit, they've all been purchased by a single entity, a company called Rose Thorn Holdings. Never heard of them, Davidson mutters. You should have. It's owned by the Adeline Fragrance Foundation, which I control, which means I own approximately $18 million of your personal debt, all of which I'm calling in. Today, now. The room watches Davidson age 10 years in 10 seconds. But that's not the best part, Roselle says, returning to her seat with the casual grace of someone who's already won. Simon has been recording every conversation you've had with him about this scheme, from federal prison, where all calls are monitored, where conspiracy to defraud a federal witness is a crime that carries 20 years. She pulls out her phone, placing it on the table. Simon's voice fills the room, tinny but clear through the prison phone system. Davidson visited me yesterday. He wanted me to lie about the divorce papers, said he'd get me early release if I testified that Roselle forged them. I told him no, I've done enough damage. It's time someone stopped him from doing more. You got Simon to help you? Dr. Kim asks, incredulous. Redemption is possible for anyone, Roselle replies, looking at Isla, who's crying silently. Even those who hurt us. Simon's learning that healing others might heal himself. Isla's learning that strength isn't about Instagram followers, but about protecting your child. This isn't over, Davidson says, but his voice carries no conviction. Yes, it is. FBI agents enter the boardroom, led by Agent Rodriguez, who'd arrested Simon 8 months earlier. Harrison Davidson, you're under arrest for extortion, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they handcuff him, Roselle addresses the board one final time. 8 months ago, my husband tried to humiliate me with truth, that his mistress was pregnant with another man's child. But his truth revealed a greater one, that this company was built on lies, corruption, and murder. Every attack since then has only proven that transformation threatens those who profit from poison. She gestures to the walls, where Elizabeth Errol's photographs hang beside images of children saved by their new programs. We've lost stockholder value but gained human value. We've sacrificed profit but secured principle. We've been called crazy for choosing compassion over capitalism, but look at the results. Millions of lives saved, dozens of communities served, and a new model for how pharmaceutical companies can operate. Charlotte Errol enters, followed by someone unexpected, Simon, in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, accompanied by federal marshals. He's thinner, older-looking, but his eyes carry something they never had during their marriage: humility. "I asked for Simon to be brought here," Roselle explains. "He has something to say." Simon looks at the room where he once ruled through fear, now transformed into something his grandmother would recognize. "I built my life on lies. Roselle rebuilt it on truth. I destroyed for profit. She's creating for purpose. I'm testifying against everyone involved in our crimes, not for early release, but because it's right." He turns to Roselle. "I never deserved you, but maybe the company finally does." The marshals take him away, but his words linger like perfume in the air, the scent of redemption, faint but real. Later, in her office, Roselle sits with Isla and her daughter, a beautiful baby with Hudson's eyes and her mother's smile. "Davidson threatened you," Roselle says, "but you still came to me this morning with the recording. Why?" "Because my daughter deserves better than the lies that created her," Isla replies. "Because you showed me that women can build empires on something other than men's approval." "What will you do now?" Roselle asks. "Hudson's offered to support us, but I want to earn my own way. I'm going back to school. Nursing. I want to help people heal instead of helping them hurt." That evening, Roselle stands in Elizabeth's laboratory, now filled with young scientists developing medicines that will cost pennies to produce. Her phone buzzes with messages, one from Dr. Okonkwo in Lagos thanking her for saving thousands of children, another from Simon saying he finally understands that truth saves while lies destroy. Charlotte Errol appears in the doorway. Elizabeth would have loved this. Seeing her formulas saving lives, her laboratory full of students, her company becoming what she intended. "She knows," Roselle says, though she's not religious. Somehow she knows. "I'm donating the estate," Charlotte announces. "It will become a treatment center for people recovering from pharmaceutical addiction. Let something good grow from all that pain." Alone finally, Roselle opens her grandmother's journal to the last entry. "My darling granddaughter, roses have thorns not for cruelty, but for protection. They draw blood from those who would pluck them carelessly, but open freely to those who approach with respect. You are my rose, beautiful and defended. Let no one diminish your bloom." Penelope enters with champagne. "So, you transformed a pharmaceutical empire, sent 3 Errol men to prison, saved millions of lives, and became the most powerful black woman in medical history. What's next?" Roselle looks at Elizabeth's formulas covering the walls, her grandmother's journals stacked on the desk, the future spreading before them like medicine finally reaching everyone who needs it. "Now we make it permanent. We ensure that when I'm gone, this company can never again choose profit over people." "And personally?" Penelope asks. "What about love, happiness, a life outside these walls?" Roselle considers the question, thinking of Hudson's patient interest, of the possibility that hearts, like companies, can be rehabilitated. "Maybe someday, but today this is enough. This victory, this transformation, this proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction." She stands at the window, watching the city lights twinkle like promises kept. 8 months ago, she'd stood in ruins of a marriage, holding divorce papers and medical records that proved her husband's sterility. Now she stands in a laboratory that's becoming a legacy, holding formulas that will save lives for generations. The rose has grown its thorns, defended its bloom, and transformed the very soil it grows in. The victory is complete, not because her enemies are destroyed, but because she's built something they can never tear down. A company that heals, a legacy that lasts, and proof that power used properly can transform poison into medicine. This is how empires truly fall, not with violence, but with virtue, not with revenge, but with revolution, not with destruction, but with reconstruction that makes the powerful realize their power was always temporary, always one strong woman away from transformation. And Roselle Fragrance, standing in her grandmother's legacy and Elizabeth's laboratory, is that woman. The rose, with all its thorns, blooms eternal.